Alright, we've got one package. Or should I say, one package. I don't know. I haven't seen Sesame Street in a long time. Kind of impacted a lot of our... Anyways, Ultimate Muscle. This is kind of nice. I do remember this being a kind of rare, if not actually unavailable, DVD. Don't think I ever got it. I think I put it on my list a billion years ago, and then eventually I just fell back on not really going and getting old stuff again, which is unfortunate. But well, here it is on Blu-ray, looking very strange. Looks like English dub only, so no Japanese with English subtitles. I'm pretty sure this is anime though, and you know, I basically mean of Japanese origin for Japanese audiences or something like that. You know what? Let's take this disc out to take a look at the other side. Very strange on the inside. But, you know, that's one of the nice things about Eastern Star Discotheque. They make sure anime that kind of don't get noticed get noticed. Here's another one, a one called Amnesia, one named Amnesia. And this one's interesting because I think this one was released by US Manga Corps, which they served that purpose before. I don't know if I've mentioned their name or not. I see both Japanese and English dubs, so, and maybe I've seen this, but I don't remember. Ooh, it's different underneath the slipcover in an interesting way. Like we have that person. I think I don't know how well I remember it. You can see if you want, if you like the other one, you can flip it. But I prefer, you know, this is, which is different from this. And then it goes back to this, so it's a kind of a display sandwich, I suppose. Kodocha. This is the complete second series. I think somewhere it's set on here at the middle school years. I'm just feeling a little something there. I think that's what it says there, but I can't read it. Or maybe that says the complete second season. You know what? Let me take a look at this real quick. It just says the complete second series. I don't know. I think this gets into portions of the anime I maybe never watched. And maybe the ultimate proof of that will come after I take the wrapping off. The same underneath. They can't all be different. Okay, yeah, this one is Japanese with English subtitles only. And I don't remember what the first series was like, but I would guess that one had subtitles, or that one might have had a dub or something like that. I mean, there was a Funimation dub, but the main problems with it are mostly related to the fact that the song that was played for the first opening was not something they were able to license, and maybe that's the same for this Discotheque series, or maybe it's been so many years that nobody cares anymore. But the two implications of that were that they used the second opening, I think, for the majority of the first series, and also there were some scenes in the Japanese with English subtitles that had absolutely no audio. They had subtitles, but they had no audio because that copyrighted song was playing in the background. Copyright system's kind of dumb, you know. Requiem of the Rose King. You know, maybe I should show that one first because that one's an Eastern Star Discotheque, but this one's on top here. And I do believe this is a Season 1 Part 2. Probably says that right there, but, you know, that's kind of hard to read. That's just my Mac letting me know that, different underneath the slipcover. That's always nice. My Mac just letting me know that, there's an update for me to ignore. Very rude. Quite rude. Alright. I do see a region A plus B on here. I haven't been checking the other ones, but this one's nice and right there. I see an English dub. I see Japanese with English subtitles. So Wise, So Young. And I don't remember what part 1 looked like. 13 through 19, 20 through 24. Okay, so 12 episodes on the first, and then 12 episodes here on the second. Nice and straightforward. Then last but not least, aim for the ace. And just as a recommendation, if you actually play, you probably shouldn't do that, because you probably don't want to injure somebody. And I mean that more from a moral standpoint. The rules probably also say that, but maybe some rules are just happy to ignore it. I don't know. Maybe I've just watched too many silly things. And really this means probably something like aim for becoming the ace or something like that. I think I've heard the name before. It looks like it's subtitled only. Aims for the big screen. I'm not sure why it feels so different. Like there's something different about the shape. But, you know, this looks like a pretty classic, I think probably, I was going to say 70s anime, but I'm not sure. It definitely has an older style there. I'm just trying to think if it probably says somewhere on the back. It probably does, but, you know, I'm not going to go hunting for it, not with this bad eyesight. But, here we go. Here's this week's anime. There's no DVDs this time, so this week's anime Blu-ray collection update. Alright, it's been an exhausting week, but let's see what we can cover. First of all, Demon Slayer Swordsmith Village arc. That would be, I guess, something's calling it Season 3. I'm trying to think if that's something that I've read from my anime list, because the train one would have been a movie, technically not a season, although there was an episodic version of it. But anyways, maybe it's Season 3. I don't know if that's something Crunchyroll is saying, but somewhere in my notes I picked up Season 3, and we watch it. You know, it's starting to be dubbed. And I'm pretty sure the second episode has already been dubbed, but I've been watching it with my friend. Well, I've caught up to the end of Season 2, or the movie, whichever was the order of stuff, with my Friday friend, so it's with him that I'm watching it. So since the dubbed episodes come out every Saturday, I'll be a little bit delayed in that regard, and really delayed because, you know, a lot of y'all might have already seen it. But as far as the first episode goes, I'd say it's actually off to a pretty good start. There's an unfortunate part of it that is like the annoying side characters, not exactly side characters, but help characters. They've been kept at a bit of a distance. I think I've mentioned before that they tend to be on a fine line, kind of irritate me more than entertain me. But they did some entertaining things with them in the first episode. It was a longer first episode, so almost more like a 2-episode thing, but at the same time, you know, I think it made good use of the time, because I think I wanted to see more. And while we could have seen more, we would have had to switch from dub to sub. And the dubs, when you're into the dub, this show's good enough for the dub, where the voices attach themselves perfectly fine, and you think of the characters as those voices, perfectly fine. So I'm, you know, perfectly content with continuing to watch it as long as it continues to be dubbed. Maybe if the industry crashes, well, I might not have Crunchyroll, and I might not have a choice to watch it or not. But, you know, assuming things don't ever get that bad, you know, watch it dubbed, and if for some reason the dubbing has to stop, maybe continue watching it subtitled. It'd be unfortunate, but, you know, if you're like me and you've been watching anime for a while, then you kind of get used to not always getting to finish a lot of really great stuff. I'd say one of the biggest pluses of this episode, let me see, there's definitely elements of it which are just kind of nice, scenic, taking things in, sort of. Maybe some ideas on how maybe their world is building up, I suppose. But also seeing implications of some of the stuff that have happened that are notable. And so there's a lot about it that just feels like in terms of starting out from a calm place from where the previous season ended, it's in a pretty good place. Probably the best thing they did with this, though, is I've mentioned before that one flaw that some arcs from some stretches of this anime have is underutilization. I'm not enunciating that word today very well. Underutilizing Nezuko, which this episode did not. She's the most fucking adorable she's ever been in the series up to this point. So, kudos. That's not the only thing that would have made me want to continue watching more, because there's some interesting stuff unraveling and happening, and I'm just curious about all this stuff. But happy place for a first episode. Definitely looking forward to more. Let me see. Sacrificial Princess and the King of Beasts, episode 7. So the previous episode ended on a cliffhanger. This one, I'd say, had some pretty nice stuff that happened in it. Maybe pretty okay. I don't know. I remember just thinking I was a little trepidatious about jumping into it, I suppose. And part of that could just be the stress of everything this past week. But there's also probably a part of it where, where it's going with the story, it's like, yeah. So there's this tricky thing where there's this kind of nice place where the show is, but it doesn't want to stay there. It's intentionally made it wibbly wobbly without destabilizing itself, I guess. So there's a kind of comfort to where it is and has been, and it's never tiptoed as much out of it as it has for this episode, in my opinion. But it's sort of like, will I come out of this feeling like there's much meaning? And I'm not sure. I feel like it's fine what happened, but I don't know, pleasant, kind of nice. Kamikatsu, Working for God in a Godless World. Okay, so that one we had, it was delayed from last week, and yeah, that's right, okay. This was actually a surprisingly good episode, I thought. I can see why some people would be having some trouble with it, because the series has its own weird eccentricness, but somewhere in there, some sort of very Kamikatsu unique to the style it does thing, unique to the world as it's set it up, and unique to the characters that are present. It had this actually incredibly touching sort of story happen in this episode, where I don't think we've gotten everything absolutely resolved, but I actually kind of appreciate what this episode did to a huge degree. Let's see, Konosuba, An Explosion of This Wonderful World. That's, maybe it's third season. I don't know if it counts as season 3 or not, but it's more Konosuba. So, episode 7. Like I mentioned last week, I was a little afraid of it treading new ground, or treading old ground too much, because the series, I guess, was going somewhere that was very well executed in Konosuba when it happened, but they don't have the correct momentum here to feel like it would be as great. And I would say that that's true to a small degree, but not as bad as I was afraid it was going to be. I'm trying to think whether or not I want to say what happened, because that could be a little spoiler, and if you have been on the fence about whether or not to watch season 3, well, me talking about it probably won't enthuse you towards doing that, but, it was okay. I think it's mostly something I just have on, but let's see. Next up, we have The Legendary Hero is Dead, episode 9. I thought this one actually worked out pretty well as well. So, like I mentioned, one of the problems with the previous episode was that I kind of felt like it was setting itself up to have a deadline but not be able to keep up with it, because it's throwing more and more complex stuff. But instead, this one was very similar to Kamikatsu in terms of pulling off something that's actually a rather touching story / twist to absolutely all the stuff from a very Legendary Hero is Dead perspective. I mean, there was interesting stuff set up in the previous episode, but this one not only did that, but it also felt like it didn't get too far off track and distracted. Like, if I were to describe some of that feeling that I'm worried about, you know, I haven't gotten to Mashley yet, but, you know, I might as well mention Mashley, Magic and Muscles, episode 8. And today's episode, I say today's episode, this week's episode wasn't that bad of an episode. I think the main problem is that while it is doing its own things in a very Mashley way, it is, however, leaning heavier into shonen-y types of things where, oh, well, now we've got our main characters established, and no, they just got separated, and there's going to be like 3 separate battles after there was one battle. It's just sort of, it's okay, but it feels a little, I guess it feels a little like the show is saying, okay, we're giving you some interesting stuff, but now we have to slow it down in order to do the stuff. And the slow it down in this case is like we're not seeing our main character do the battling, but other friends he's made along the way as complete side distraction. And it's a very shonen thing for shows to do. And Legendary Hero, I was a little worried that it was doing something, maybe not exactly that, but something sort of like that, where whatever story beats it goes down, it's like, well, it's time for the side distractions that prevent us from reaching a goal that we've obviously made. Which isn't necessarily bad, and sometimes there's something to be said about, you know, instant gratification and, oh, you need a show to give you a reason to watch it right now. I mean, there can be a good reason to argue that a show should be giving you something to watch right now, but maybe sometimes that's good setup. And I think the really good shows somehow manage to keep that up at a very surprising pace. When actuality, it's really hard. But, you know, again, we're 9 episodes into The Legendary Hero is Dead, and they did a pretty good job. For a lot of these series, we're actually getting close to the end of their runtime, I'm guessing, because a lot of them are one core, probably. So, you know, now's around the time to start wondering, are they properly setting up for something interesting to happen there to either hook you into being curious about the next thing or what? And maybe next week's when I start talking about a lot of that. Maybe. Let's see. Next up I have, Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon? Season 4, Episode 18. What all happened in this episode? Nice stuff. Fun stuff. Good things on all the fronts where they're more utilizing some of the stuff that I wanted to see in play that I mentioned they started last episode. So, good stuff. I'm definitely curious to see where it's going to go from here, because it's definitely something that's not looking so holy shit. But now it's just like, all right. And I want to see where it goes from there. But have to hold off because, you know, again, I watched it dubbed, and some of those dubbed voices have stuck with me pretty strongly. Let's see. And speaking of stuff I have to watch dubbed, Dr. Stone, Season 3, Episode 7. Actually a very interesting episode with a lot of interesting twists, thoughts, stuff. Maybe the big problem here is, as I mentioned, I do feel like the people versus people distraction can be a bit of a distraction. It's a very shonen thing that the show does. It doesn't do it as badly as like Mashley, I think, because I think even with the stuff it's done up to this point, most of that person versus person stuff still stuck pretty closely to the principles of the show. And I guess I just worry because the next confrontation, well, hopefully it's able to continue keeping up speed, because at a certain point it can very easily become, I don't know, maybe lose that science momentum or something, which is not a very good description, but at the same time it's the perfect description, 1,000,000,000%. Let's see. My One Hit Kill Sister, Episode 9. What exactly happened in this episode? That happened... Okay stuff, I suppose. I just worry that the show leans a little too heavily on a storytelling element that I don't like too much. Let's see. Rokudo's Bad Girls, episode 9. I don't remember what I had to comment about episode 8. Episode 9, it's okay. It's kind of interesting stuff. I'm not sure if it's stuff that has me the most excited, but definitely stuff that's curious, and I'm curious to see where it's going to go and what it's going to do, and maybe it'll do something great, and maybe it'll just do something that's okay, I guess. It's nothing too bad. If anything, the show might just have a problem of maybe there's nothing too great either, and that might be a very, very subjective thing for this one. Too Cute Crisis, episode 9. Actually, I kind of enjoyed the episode. I mentioned before that I think one of the strongest things about the show is playing with the idea of, these aliens just can't help but find that Earth creatures are some of the most cute, adorable things in the universe. Like, the previous cutest thing doesn't even hold a candle up to them or something like that. And it played around with that a little bit, but it also played around with, I guess, just our characters making decisions going forward with certain things they were doing, and it was okay. Maybe there's an issue where I'm not sure if you watch episode to episode and you say, oh, I'm definitely going to really like the next episode. It's at a weird middle ground like that, I suppose. About the only thing that's interesting to mention about this episode is I've mentioned before about how I don't feel like it gets the mannerism of cats and dogs right. I'm pretty sure it messed up rabbits, but not being a person that knows rabbits too well, as in like I don't have this idea in my head of exactly how they think, maybe a partial idea, but I don't think I can get into their head and, understand what they're thinking, what they're trying to do quite as much as a lot of cats and dogs. Obviously, I'm not a mind reader. I can't do that for every cat and dog, but, a lot of them kind of communicate their stuff. Like, okay, so an interesting observation of, like, a dog moment. And I'll talk about this in a little more detail later, but I was at a coworker's child's first birthday. And as a part of the events, one of the things I noticed was there was a dog next door in the yard over, just kind of sitting on their deck, staring just over the fence at us. And in my mind, while I couldn't exactly understand it specifically what it was doing, I was just thinking, wow, that's actually a really nice dog. Because there's two things I could see it doing. Either, since it wasn't barking at people or making a noise, that kind of meant that to a certain degree it was people watching. And the two things there is either it's like, oh wow, I like seeing all these people, which is kind of cute. Or the other thing is, since there were a lot of kids at this, it might have also been thinking, oh, now there's a lot of kids over there. That's really nice. And in my mind, that just seemed like a really nice dog. I say that, and I should probably know what the breed is, but I'm not going to be able to say anything. And maybe I could have Googled it before, but I didn't know I was going to talk about it. But, that was an interesting thing. And it's not like this show doesn't have things like that in it. It's just that sometimes it's like a combination of the animators have to animate something that's not really how the creatures would think. Some people do put words in their mouth that are definitely not what they would think. Little things like that. I've said this before. Hell's Paradise, episode 9. Great episode. So I mentioned before that if there's one thing about this show that can be weak from time to time, it's that every once in a while it has to spend time with the other characters, and they're really interesting. The other characters are really interesting. But it's done a really good job of creating an interesting main character and main cast of characters, and I've definitely wanted to see more of them. And this episode was, the other ones, it's like, okay, those characters are only important if they're planning to go somewhere with those story-wise. And this episode definitely makes it feel like that while, being focused on our main characters and the interesting stuff they do, say, think, whatever. So, I'd say it was a good episode. Let me see. Summoned to Another World for a Second Time, episode 9. I think, as I predicted based on the name, this was a flashback. And, the show kind of continues to be weak where there's an interesting idea buried in there somewhere, but somehow in its execution, it's... Like, in this episode, it's trying to introduce the backstory of the character Toma that they've mentioned a billion times in here, and... I guess it's trying to set up some of what Toma's going for and stuff, and some of it just feels a little convenient, forced, but also not forceful and notable enough to really feel like maybe maybe it's not establishing the story beats I feel like it should. And, you know, I guess that's par for the course for the rest of it. Although the interesting thing is usually that's because, we're setting up that our main character is seeing someone else for the first time or for the second time. And while that should be interesting, it doesn't do anything actually interesting with that. Now, I guess it's not just that. It's there's something else about the show that is that same idea, but at a slightly higher level. It's not horrible, but it's definitely... I don't know, it's not as fulfilling to watch on an episode-by-episode basis. In my opinion, at least. The Aristocrats' Otherworldly Adventures, Serving God to Go Too Far, Episode 10. Okay episode, I suppose, although it feels mostly pointless in terms of stuff that's been established. Although I say mostly, but not entirely, because there's been some notable, interesting stuff there. But at the same time, the show feels like it's stuck in certain mannerisms that I'm not sure if they actually make sense. And I don't know if I can say much more than that without spoiling what actually happened in the previous episode or this episode, etc. So, yeah, I don't know. Guess I can't talk about that too much more then. In Another World with My Smartphone, Season 2, Episode 10. Let's see, what all happened in this episode? Introduced another character, interesting. Introduced other stuff that our main character is doing. Some other interesting stuff that I guess was just maybe it was just we need to get these characters, staying active and not just sitting around getting ready for the big battle or something like that. Although I'm not sure if that's exactly what they were doing with this stuff or not. But they're definitely trying to establish more of the connections that we've been told at the end of the last season were going to happen. Not which specific ones, but we know that there's a number of them. And you can fucking guess what's going to happen based on the opening. So there's some elements of this where you're not surprised, but other elements of it where it's like, you're just waiting to see what happens. And I think if you've gotten this far into the series, you'd probably continue enjoying it. It's not horrible, but it is definitely doing some sort of build-up, which it's been kind of doing since the very beginning. So, more of that is good. Let's see. I got a cheat skill in Another World and became unraveled in the real world 2, Episode 10. Yeah, I guess if I'm supposed to be talking about Episode 10s as if they are the ends of cores coming up, this one's interesting because I kind of feel like maybe this episode is giving us something that we would expect at the end of the core. One of the problems is I did look at My Enemy List, and it's suggesting that it's only a single core. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't already have more stuff scheduled. I already heard that, they've got more Eminence in Shadow ready for the end of this year or something like that. Or they're prepared or going to do that. And, maybe there's some shows where they just know that's going to happen. I don't know if Cheat Skill in Another World... it counts as that. I get the impression it's not been impressing people as much as something, but at the same time, I think a lot of the problem with that is the interesting things it does do. It feels like they just come out too slowly, and maybe there's a big problem where, as this episode established, we don't really have an idea of a forward goal, just kind of a forward direction that the character goes there at a leisurely pace. And of course, it's stonewalling a lot of story elements from building up because it likes to spend half its time in the real world, half in the isekai. And there's been consequences that happen because of that. And, it's interesting stuff, but at the same time, it's hard to say if the ending of the core is going to feel that great, per se. I mean, it might, but it's not, I don't feel like it's going to wow me. But, that might be setting myself up to get wowed anyways. But, yeah. Entertaining stuff, I suppose. Why Raliana ended up at the Duke's Mansion, Episode 9. So, the interesting thing about this is my prediction or my observation in the previous episode, how this one seemed to be setting up to be more interesting in terms of the fact that our main character is resurrected in this world. Like that would become more of a thing. It hasn't been much of a thing. Like our character hasn't shown as much advanced knowledge. There's been little things she said that are actually really pleasant along those lines, but in terms of and she's been resurrected, they haven't really done much. But there was a little bit of theming and interaction with a new character that they teased at the end of the previous episode that actually worked out surprisingly fulfilling along those lines. So I would say episode 9 was a pretty good episode. And then last but not least, Death Mount Death Play. That dead and that death are... I always keep mixing those up. It's very confusing. So when I rewatched a little bit of episode 8, I think I have to amend my comments from last one, where there was some entertaining assassin girl background noise things in there. But in this episode, I feel like she's back up to par, I suppose. You know, in terms of, she just had a lot of her fun background characters. Because that's one of the things that makes her a fun character is when she's in the background or when she's in the foreground, she's just fun when they're doing stuff with her. So having her say weird things, make weird noises, really good when they're not doing anything else, like having her move really weird and make strange but very thought-provoking and interesting combat movement, I suppose. So, good in that regard. I think one of the weaknesses of the episode is kind of related to the previous couple of episodes, establishing a little more strongly some of the relevant characters in the world all around them that are there. But it did end with... So there was a very interesting thing that happened in there, and it did end with a hook that's like, oh shit, well, why isn't episode 10 here already? Come here. So, good place for the series to be, because it kind of means the past couple of episodes may have been setting up some stuff that are about to happen. And I don't see this series being floodgates, but I do see kind of a dam linking sort of thing going on, maybe more like a beaver dam and not the Hoover Dam or anything like that. But you know, there's it feels like it's been building up, and there's going to be an interesting thing that happens now. And if there isn't, then that's a mistake on the anime. But it's done a good job of building up properly to what would be the final quarter of the first core. Assuming this is a single core show, it might be longer. There might be more to it. It might actually resolve story. You never know. Sometimes you just have to watch to find out. But yeah, so a bit of a mix of watching this week. Did I watch anything else? Is there anything else notable for me to mention? Nothing immediately comes to mind. So, obviously I've been playing Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. A little bit of Dead by Daylight, but Dead by Daylight requires me to interact with other people too much, and in my exhausted state, I'm reverting more and more to my introverted tendencies, which means I have to force myself to start playing Dead by Daylight. And I have fun when I do it, but, to keep up on dailies and to get in preparation for not only the next... I guess this week the next chapter of the tome comes out. But also, next week will be the release of the new chapter. So I need to make sure I'm at the right place for all that stuff. And I'm burping quite a bit. Although dinner was pretty good, so it does actually taste a little bit good coming back out. I know y'all didn't need to know that, but I said it anyways. I guess it's my getting old and not giving a shit attitude or something like that. But Tears of the Kingdom, I'm just continuing to slowly explore things. At this point, I think I've spent a little bit more time focusing on mining Zonite than maybe I have been before, to the point where I'm at 7 out of 8 of the full batteries. in my inventory, and so I guess I'm getting pretty close to the point where I should probably be going to places. But there is something to be said about, if I max out those batteries, I have nothing else to do with Zonite, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. And at that point, that's when you're like, oh, well, it's time to start building orbital satellite lasers or things like that. And I think there's a part of me that wants to reach that point, and it'll be sooner rather than later. But fun stuff. But otherwise, if you're curious, oh no, I don't want to talk about that part, because if you haven't played it, that might be a pleasant surprise for you. But I'm definitely enjoying exploring some of the unique areas that are unique to this game, and not just the old Breath of the Wild. But if you're curious, I play like a cautious little sneak. I don't tend to engage with monsters too much. I do tend to dump a ton of bomb arrows in certain circumstances. You've got plenty of bomb arrows in this game. Plenty of arrows, plenty of bombs, bomb arrows, burn shave. And, but if I have to deal with a monster encampment, I do tend to try to, I guess, sneak attack as many of them as I can. And that's probably why the orbital space lasers are starting to sound so great, because that sounds like something where if I get that set up, then I'll probably be able to start using that, I guess. Oh well. And the other thing I was going to talk about, so I did mention I went to a coworker's 1-year-old birthday party, and maybe you're thinking, well, why bother talking about that? Well, to be honest, it's mostly because it was an interesting experience. So, for starters, this coworker is from Cameroon. It's a country in Africa. And she wanted to do some elements of this that were traditional like that. But I'm pretty sure not all these traditions are from that, because honestly, some of it struck me as more like, holy shit, is this a 1-year-old birthday party or a wedding? Because there's a lot of people here. Maybe you're like, oh, a bouncy castle. Well, maybe you've heard of those being around, and a ball pit. Oh, and 2 photo stations. And what? 8, 9 tables? I don't know. There were a lot of tables. And not a lot of space in that yard for them. They even had 2 people they hired who were dressed like futuristic Daft Punk sort of people. Clearly these are professional people who do that sort of stuff. I think a lot of stuff rented. They even had somebody doing the cooking for them. But yeah, the 2 people in the Daft Punk like things with lights all over the place, shining lights all over the place. One of them was on stilts with a display on their chest, displaying a whole lot of birthday partying imagery. I remember seeing some SpongeBob in there. But there was probably more than just that. Probably things that a lot of kids would be interested in. Not 1-year-olds, mind you. Yeah, and yeah, there were just so many people at this event. When I say that there was maybe a dozen kids at least, you should understand that these weren't kids that this 1-year-old knows, because they're 1 year old. They don't know. These would just be of the people who arrived who had kids. That's how many kids there just happened to be. There were just so many people. And one of the more interesting cultural things that was there that I was a part of was, I guess there's this thing where sometimes the men go off into their own little circle, and you can only enter that circle if you're wearing a hat or the right kind of hat or something like that. And one of the people that was helping run the party let me borrow his hat as he introduced me in there, and I just kind of sat there and chilled with them. Now, the unfortunate thing is they were like, yeah, take whatever you want. But the problems were, I did not have any energy, and that was before I went there. If I could have slept in the entire day, I probably would have. And I've had Saturdays like that. So basically it meant I just wanted some water, because I don't drink anything. I don't like a lot of drinks with sugar in it. The most sugary drink, other than occasionally orange juice, but I go for long periods of time where I don't drink orange juice. So other than orange juice, sometimes I will get, when I go to Galaxy Cafe, y'all don't know that. It's a weird, in a good way, one-off little shop. They have one of those alternative soda things with the pumpkin juice. And the pumpkin juice is too much, but if I water it down, it's actually pretty nice. It makes it kind of like a... not exactly a lemonade-y sort of water, but there's definitely something leaning along that direction, I suppose. And, you know, again, when you say, oh, watered down sugar water, okay. And that's rare. That's like once a month, if even. So, you know, I'm a pretty plain person when it comes to drinks, and so I like water, but, you know, it's a party, so there's a lot of alcohol there. Well, the unfortunate thing is I kind of avoid alcohol. I mean, you see how fucking obsessive a personality I have? And this isn't the new stuff, I'll admit. And a lot of the stuff lately has definitely been me running on momentum and fumes. So fortunately I can continue recording this and, you know, I guess making forward progress on it because of that momentum. But, you know, I've never started drinking alcohol simply because there's a real risk that I could abuse it. I mean, I'm barely holding on to myself with just Tears of the Kingdom. You add something there that actually has a chemical effect on my body and not the body's chemical effects on itself, and that could be a pretty big recipe for disaster combined with an obsessive personality. So I've gone 40 years of my life without drinking alcohol, knowing that I pretty much need to avoid it. Maybe not need it. Need is a strong word. It's probably a good idea to avoid it, mostly because at the end of the day I can still socialize with the people who do drink with and drink something. So, like, you know, while they would maybe tap beers, I could tap water with them because I don't really have a problem with the fact that they're drinking. It's a personal reason why I'm not. But yeah, they also had food in the middle, but the other problem is that I can go through these waves, and when I'm completely exhausted, like I was on Saturday, I'm just not that hungry. I might have finally eaten a bit of a small dinner at around midnight or so. And for some reason, one of the little girls gave me a hamburger from the Thing of Hamburgers. Not sure why. I have thoughts, but the good news is you don't have to think about it too much. You're just like, yeah, well, I guess I have a hamburger now. I could use some ketchup, and that's all. But that was still pretty heavy, even for what I was feeling there. So, you know, it meant that I probably didn't look like much of a guest. I enjoyed being there. I definitely would have preferred being home, but I do like bringing myself out of home to experience these interesting things. Where, I don't know, you get to experience different cultural things. And again, I think I've been to more subtle weddings. So it's interesting that the most extravagant birthday party I've ever been to was a coworker's 1-year-old's party. And there was probably a little bit more to it than just that. I think a good excuse to be celebratory and not exactly family coming together. I think it was a communal thing. I think a lot of these people were from Cameroon. I got that impression, but unfortunately I couldn't understand absolutely everything they were saying when they were speaking not English. And it doesn't help that parts of the brain is like, hey, the way they said that sounds a little bit like Spanish, and the way they said that sounds a little bit like Japanese. It's my brain only confusing itself further. At best, I can tell you one person said Austin once. And I think it was about, hey, it's nice that we could all get together here in Austin, because a lot of them drove from, like, Dallas or something like that. So, you know, it was a real communal thing as opposed to a familial thing. Which, again, makes it feel a little bit more wedding-ish. I don't know. Weddings can have some pretty big familial get-together. So it wasn't perfectly comparable to that, but very interesting. Oh, well. So, now that's all done, I don't think I have anything else I was going to talk about. If y'all were curious, the car passed inspection, no problem. Registration will arrive whenever. So, it was nice to get that taken care of. Cool. Alright, y'all, have a nice week.